welcome to Risk Chats with AFERM. I'm your host, Paul Marshall. Today's a very exciting podcast. We've been trying to get this one set up for a while. We're discussing the Risk Appetite Statement at USAID with Reggie Mitchell and Bill Steiger. And Tal and I get into the statement, how they came up with it, how it can serve as a great example for your agency if you want to put your thoughts in writing. And just think it's a great example that folks can use, and I recommend you go download it right now and follow along. You can pretty much Google USAID Risk Appetite Statement. It'll come right up. And without further ado, let's get to the show. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today we're at USAID and we have two illustrious guests with us today, Reggie Mitchell and Bill Steiger. Good afternoon. How are you all doing?
Doing well. Thank you, Paul.
Great. Thanks for having us.
All right. And we also have our co-host, Mr. Tal, over here.
Hey, good afternoon.
All right. Well, why don't we start, if you all wouldn't mind, just introducing yourself and what your role is here at the agency and your role with the ERM program. So why don't we start off with Bill?
Thanks. I'm Bill Steiger. I'm the Chief of Staff here at USAID, and I'm also the agency's Interim Chief Risk Officer.
Great.
Good afternoon. And I'm Reggie Mitchell, and I'm USAID Chief Financial Officer and the Executive Secretariat for our ERM governance framework.
Great. Well, let's jump right into it here. So we wanted to talk about, our topic for today is primarily the wonderful risk appetite statement you all published back in June 2018. A lot of folks have been reading it, really like it. I think it's just a great example for other folks to follow. So we kind of want to back up a little bit from that. How did your program originate? Where are you at? As far as in the maturity level of your ERM program, but then how you guys decided to come up with this appetite statement and how you put it together. So why don't we just go back to the kind of a little bit about how you all, how you started and what's your current framework?
Okay. All right. Well, that's well done. Thank you, Paul. So, here at USAID, our enterprise risk management framework is a holistic, agency-wide approach to risk management. We combine the impact of our risks as an interrelated portfolio rather than examining risks in silos. So under our ERM approach, the goal is not to control or avoid all risk, but rather to take advantage of opportunities while reducing and mitigating its threats to maximize our agency overall likelihood of achieving our mission and objectives. A key outcome of our USAID ERM implementation is the agency risk appetite statement, as you mentioned earlier.
Right.
USAID ERM framework was conceived by a cross-agency working group in response to OMB Circular A-123, which, as we know, require agency to establish an ERM process, but also in response to the agency's own needs and thoughts about how to better manage risk holistically. The working group included staff across the agency to ensure it took into consideration a broad range of opinions about how USAID was currently managing risks and emerging risks. The end result was a new body, which we call the Risk Management Council, commonly referred to as the RMC. This council is made up of senior leadership at the SES and Senior Foreign Service career level. This council will meet quarterly or as needed to oversee the agency risk profile and to discuss risk. In addition, the ERM was added to the portfolio of our senior political leadership, tasked with overseeing ERM, and are members of the Executive Management Council on Risk and Internal Controls, which we also refer to as MCRIC. They meet semi-annually or as needed and is responsible for certifying the agency risk profile to the administrator. This body is chaired by our Deputy Administrator, Bonnie Glick.
Now, how big is that, Reggie?
We have approximately 25 members. It's all of our assistant administrators, it's all of our statutory officers, and several of our independent office directors.
So there's a really funny old book called Parkinson's Law that talks about the ideal group size of 7. And by the time you get to 12, you're at maxed out. So like 25, you're dealing like I think there's states with smaller legislatures, right? So how do you guys get the conversation going with 25 people on risk?
Oh, okay. Good question. Well, what we try to do is to make sure that our members are well informed of what is expected of them as members of this council.
Right.
And we do that in a number of ways. We do provide ERM 101 training. We have a robust website that have all the ERM artifacts associated with it. So it will give them some comfort to know what is expected when they get to the meeting. Now, one of the things that's emphasized is a pretty well structured meeting. People wait their turn to speak. Okay, it is not as contentious as you may think it is, because early on we made a point to inform our leadership. This is not a way for this body to take over your risk and micromanage the leadership in the agency. This body goal is to understand what are the risks and to have knowledge of what is being done about the risk and who is responsible for the risk, as we call the risk owner.
Right.
And we've been pretty adherent to that in the several meetings that we have had of this body of senior leadership of the agency. But very good question, Tal.
Thanks.
And would this primarily be the body of folks that would take action on things or use these risks in their decision making? This is the folks that need to know, right?
Yes,
Okay.
and that's the expectation,
That's the point, yeah.
is that you see this risk, and if those risks impact your program that you oversee, that you take into account with the mitigating measures.
Right. Okay, because everyone's talking about ERM. If it doesn't impact your strategic planning, it's not going to impact your performance. So this is your body of strategic planners that shape your programs and your strategies going forward. That sounds great.
Well, Bill, why don't we talk a little bit about the actual risk appetite statement? So maybe just a little background on how you all came up with this idea and go from there.
Sure. Great. When I got to the agency, one of the first things that people told me was that the agency had become too risk averse. I found that over the course of my first few months here to be true. And we had a culture, we're still trying to change that culture, but that we had a culture where I think more than understanding risk as Reggie has put it, not just avoiding threats, but also taking advantage of opportunities, people really focused on the downside. And we wanted to find a way to send very clear guidance to our staff internally and to our external partners that our intention was not to be as risk averse as we were in the past, and to give people a very clear roadmap for examining risk, for understanding the concept of risk, and then for weighing opportunities and threats and informing how we respond to those risks. So we thought it was important to also make sure that that document was public. Now, Office of Management and Budget, Circular A123, doesn't require this kind of an effort, but we think it very clearly fits in the spirit of what A123 asks of us in terms of a risk management program. And because we had become, in some ways, insular and risk averse, we needed, in our opinion, in the front office, to make sure that we were sending very clear signals out to the rest of the world that the agency was changing and that we wanted people to be more forward-leaning on risk, to take more risks, and to take advantage of opportunities in a way maybe they had felt constrained from doing in the past.
If anything about organizational culture is self-reinforcing and promotes the status quo, because that's how you know if you're in the group, is if you behave like the group. So until you have this crystal clear directive that says our culture's heading here, and then it's in everyone's hands, and then you speak to it and then promote it, you begin promoting that new status quo that you're seeking. So that sounds fantastic as a cultural change mechanism.
That's exactly right. And I'll give you one example of the kinds of things we're trying to change. When I say we're risk averse, so we're a grant making and contract making agency. That's what we do. 80% of our budget goes out the door every year in the form of grants and contracts, cooperative agreements. Our portfolio of implementers over the last decade and a half has become really concentrated. So 25 organizations are responsible for 60% of our spend in a given fiscal year. 75 organizations responsible for 80% of our spend.
And what is that spend?
it's between 18 and 19 billion dollars a year on the program side.
Right.
So it's a lot of money.
Right.
We're not the biggest federal agency, but
It starts to add up.
it starts to add up. Absolutely. So that's a really small number of organizations for that amount
Right.
of investment. Similarly, in the way that we give away that money, we have, Congress has, in its generosity, given us more than 30 ways to do grants, contracts, cooperative agreements, and other kinds of transactions. We use 2 of them 80% of the time. So not only is our portfolio very concentrated in relatively few hands, the way we manage that portfolio is also similarly very concentrated, despite the universe of possibilities that are out there. So one of the main purposes of what we're doing on risk for the programmatic portfolio is getting people to understand that it's okay to maybe enter into a little more risky set of transactions, to experiment, to be innovative, to take advantage of some things that maybe might be out of their comfort zone, to go to some partners with whom we've never worked, and to fail. That we're sending the message that failure's okay. Fail fast, and maybe we don't put as much money on the line on a risky bet as on some safe ones, but that it's all right to be innovative and to take risks that might not work out.
Right, and this, I mean, I love this document. I mean, you're giving folks the roadmap of where to take more risk, where to take less or none.
Correct.
It's very clear in here. Low appetite. Security.
That's right.
Certain things you don't even think about it.
The higher risk always ends up in the learning, growing areas where you want innovation and you want something new to take a risk at something better. And that makes perfect sense because, when they say learning, you don't have the cognitive dissonance. If something isn't going wrong in your mind, you don't learn. And that if you don't try a new thing and fail partially, then there's no benefits in terms of improving something. So that's fantastic. It goes right back to your culture you're putting in a culture of learning and growing, and using the risk appetite statement. Now, does the agency have they grasped that risk appetite statement as their tool for corporate change or organizational change?
So the administrator absolutely has used this, and we all use this as a way to make strategic planning decisions, or help us make strategic planning decisions. It's part of what we're doing in what we call our transformation, which is our large reorganization. That will be a physical reorganization of our units, but also in the way that we're reforming our procurement, reforming the way that we do partnering, looking at staffing in a different way, and as you pointed out, that we're also sending signals about what we're not tolerating. Right? We continue to have low tolerance for security violations, or we want to make sure that our people are secure. That is an extremely high priority for us. And similarly, we have no tolerance for waste, fraud, and abuse. Right? Those principles, also embedded in the risk appetite statement, place the guardrails around the innovation and the risk that we're willing to take, wanting people to take opportunities, wanting to do new bold things. We're going to restructure ourselves in a way we think will allow us to take advantage of those opportunities. But there are still going to be some things that are not acceptable.
Right.
So let me go back to something you said. You said that obviously this is a public document. I have a copy right here. I got it off the internet. So again, walk us through why you thought that was important, and even how did you get that cleared to happen.
You want to take that one?
I can just see cooey stamped all over this. You got our privacy officer where we work, stamp cooey, when in doubt, put cooey on it.
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, I came to USAID approximately 5 years ago now. I came from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So I was used to very structured guidance and directive. We have always dealt with risk in this agency, but it was done in silos. It was done programmatically. Different bureaus, they had their own tolerance level, and the top leadership of the agency, the administrator and deputy administrator, may not have been totally cognizant of all what those risks. And it's one thing when you're being told in piecemeal of different risks and different opportunities. It's another thing when you see it in a portfolio spread out, because then you can start to see the connection, right? And so it wasn't a hard sell to convince leadership to invest in some resources to develop this risk appetite. And as I mentioned earlier, we stood up a working group. We had a lot of people involved. People from the missions came in and got involved. So we had a lot of input. So it was truly ground up. through the direction of mainly Bill and his capacity as the interim chief risk officer, as well as the risk management council, which again is the career of senior leadership of the agency. So from my perspective, I didn't find it as a hard sell because I had a lot of support from agency leadership.
Right. That's great.
Now, there were some people who didn't want us to release this
Of
document.
course, right?
Now, why would they want that, Bill?
People said you can't send this out there. It's going to be somehow a roadmap to our vulnerabilities. You're going to actually increase our risk by putting the appetite statement out there publicly. We didn't believe that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because we wanted to, and still are in the process of promoting this culture change, we thought it was really important to be on the record about
Right.
that.
Right.
And we're a decentralized agency. We have operations in 80 countries around the world. We've got 12,000 staff, many of whom don't ever come to Washington. They're Foreign Service nationals who live and work in the countries in which we're making our investments. Our own internal communications channels don't always reach everybody.
Right.
Similarly, we've got partners, hundreds and hundreds of partners who are all over the world, not just in the United States. And if we wanted to show that we were serious about this agenda of changing the way we're operating, we felt it was really important to make it easy and accessible for them to read in a very clear way what this new direction meant.
And plus, your IG apparently has never got that memo because they keep putting management challenges in your PAR every year,
That's right.
along with everyone else's, and the findings from the financial audit statement. And so, there's some good things about communicating risks and challenges out there, because then everybody comes with that at that large level, like you're saying, at the enterprise wide, are now being aligned to a single perspective, a single vocabulary, a single vision.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's the that's the intent of these financial reports and agency reports. I mean, we're trying to be transparent, communicate what the agency's doing and the risks and the things that you're doing, great as well. So that's just part of the mission anyway. So it makes sense. And listeners at home, I say definitely go down and download this now. We're gonna start digging into it, but but no, I mean, and there's nothing in here. I mean, this is you're not giving away any secrets here. This is but it's just almost like tenets. This is kind of our principles that we're gonna follow. And actually, one of them in here is to say we're going to be open with media and social media and press, and it's all in the same vein. You're being open about your direction.
It is a vision statement for managerial and executive behaviors to direct their programs in a unified way.
Yep.
That agrees with what the agency head wants to see.
Correct. And for managing staff, for managing our money, for managing our property, for managing our IT systems, it's really a guide for, as you say, all of the strategic decisions that we make at the agency, and putting some parameters around them, giving people pretty clear direction about what's tolerated and what's not tolerated, but with a bias towards innovation, with a bias towards leaning forward, not hunkering down and assuming that every new idea is somehow a threat to us.
Yeah, one of the ways I work is a co-chair of a small agency community practice with AFERM.
AFERM, yeah.
And we had our own little survey of who wants to see the risk appetite statement and understands it in their agency, and then who has it implemented at some level. And most people felt they had this sense of how it's supposed to impact the agency in the way that you guys have done, and very few had yet succeeded in doing this. So I'm definitely going to bring this along on our next meeting to show them a great example.
Yeah, right.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, speaking of that, so let's walk through this a little bit. Just kind of, how it's structured, how you guys put it together to basically give other folks some ideas how to do it themselves.
Yeah. So again, through this working group that we put together, that was cross-sectional backgrounds, program folks, financial folks, contracting folks, and managers, and that's how we developed the 7 categories of risks that we came up with that was applicable to our work here at USAID. And then once we did that, we socialized drafts of this appetite statement among the agency, asking for feedback. Okay, and then from that we consolidated the feedback. We discussed it in the RMC. And we made some decisions, many rewrites, to get it to the point where it got to this final product, and that's what really gave it the credibility. Now, the most important part of that was the managers and the staff that worked in that working group, the discussions, the logic flow, why we're doing what we're doing. That was all, was articulated in the meetings. Was articulated in writing. Okay, so you didn't have just a document that was this place code in front of someone and say, this is our risk appetite. We had champions. We had folks that actually were working on this working group, managers working on this working group. They understood what was being said, how they got to where we got to, and the risk appetite. And I thought that was very important. So this was an all of agency effort to come up with this document.
So it was in that working group where you came up with the final 7 areas?
It was the recommendation, and it was more than 7. Okay, but we gotten direction from the RMC Council, and of course we work very closely with the interim chief risk officer as well. So
what didn't make it?
Beg your pardon?
What didn't make it? You had more than 7. You got 7 now.
It's so long ago I can't recall.
Fair enough.
But it was a good experience. It was a collective experience, and I think
the group owned it when they were done.
Yes, absolutely.
And one of the things that was really important to us, especially because we made the decision that this was going to be public, and as we went through the writing process, we kept telling people that they needed to understand that this ultimately was going to be a product for public consumption.
Right.
So they had to write it with that in mind. We needed clarity in the language. We needed plain spoken English. We needed to make sure that people could really understand what we were saying, to use as little jargon as we possibly could, to be as very precise as we possibly could about what we mean and what we don't mean, what we tolerate, what we don't tolerate, and the relative risk appetite that we've got for each one of these 7 areas. And it's particularly important for an international agency when, for a lot of our employees and for a lot of our partners, English isn't their first language. So we've got to be as clear as possible if we want to send that message and have them understand it.
And it's interesting that your risk appetite statement has its own document with lots of structure around it. You explain the framework up front, and then you have your categorical definitions, and then you have your 7 areas explained with very specific and clear examples of what is and is not included at what level of risk. It's not an appendix to another document as a more as a bolt-on or something also good. It is its own sort of cornerstone document for your risk program. I thought that was a great idea.
Yeah, we needed it to stand on its own.
Right.
We internally have access to lots of other things that inform the risk program, like the risk register for the agency. We don't publish that. That goes into a level of detail where, that's not appropriate for everybody in the world to see. But this had to be something where if someone walked off the street, went home, punched this up on the internet, whether they work with us or are thinking about working with us, whether they work for us or are thinking about working for us, that they would have a really clear understanding of what our risk management program is all about, the way we look at this, and the expectations that we have of them as either employees or partners.
Did you get feedback from the IG?
We did get feedback from the IG. The IG has been pleased with this effort.
As much as IG can be pleased.
It's always
we love our IGs. We love our IGs.
So
muted print.
Right.
So,
we knew what that meant.
Yeah, no, I really like how each of the 7 areas. I mean, you kind of have a little at the beginning. Is this a low? Is this a medium? Is it a high? There's an overall. Okay, is it low, medium, high? So off the bat, you kind of get it from that point. But then you really dive in. These are the ones where we have a low or a medium or a high within, and it averages up to the low or high. It really has. These are bullets that to me are it sounds like important efforts for your agency and things that kind of summarize what's important to you guys. Right?
Yeah,
I mean it's really.
And it was important to us that the targeted audience was not only internal and external, but also we wanted to make sure every employee that works for USAID understand our risk tolerance as they perform their job, regardless of what they do for the agency. So we thought that was very important as well.
That's right. Risk is everybody's. Risk management is everybody's business. This isn't just for Reggie or for me or for a mission director or for the administrator. This is every employee's business.
It's not shelfware.
No.
Right. Exactly.
Correct.
So speaking of that, then, how do you envision this the statement should be utilized by staff and by everybody here?
So a couple things, and Reggie, follow, please. It's also important to understand that we're trying to link this to a number of the other processes and strategies and efforts at the agency in a specific way, so that it actually becomes a matrix that influences, not theoretically, but practically everything that we do. So, for example, some of the things that we call out in the risk appetite statement are mirrored in our joint strategic plan. We have a strategic plan that we do every few years with the State Department. And so some of these things are actually linked to or part of some of our agency goals in our joint strategic plan, so echoed here. Similarly, we've started to embed a number of these things in the performance standards and in the performance evaluations of our senior staff on both the Foreign Service and the Civil Service side that then cascade down to employees.
How about your CBJ annual performance targets?
So there are a number of these things that are also connected to those performance targets as well. And we use a number of these things also in, for example, we just talked about with the administrator this afternoon, our annual budget requests. So we're in many places either asking for money to make sure that we're addressing these areas appropriately, like on cybersecurity, or we're using this language to indicate in our budget requests that we're asking for programmatic money, say differently, to take advantage of opportunities in a way that flows from the philosophy that's in the risk appetite statement. So we're trying to make sure, not perfect yet, but trying to make sure we're connecting all of these dots together.
Right. No, I mean, a lot of the agencies that I've talked to that are a little reticent to get too deep into ERM, I think this is what they need to hear. I mean, this really is a useful tool for management, and it's integrated into decision making and strategy and budget. It's not just a compliance list. You have to make a list and follow that list. So you guys are showing this is really used, by executives at a high level for decision making, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the administrator wanted to make sure as we got into this process that we're not just checking boxes. This isn't just because somebody's made us do
Enterprise
it.
list management?
Right. It's not just because there's an OMB circular. It's not just because there's laws that say we have to do this kind of stuff. It's that he really saw the opportunity to make this into a tool for culture change and a tool for management.
And just to summarize what I just heard, you guys are saying that especially this risk appetite statement and how it drives ERM, that it is a thread that goes through the fabric of strategic planning, performance planning, both at the agency and individual and senior leader level, plus resource planning at the budget level, and then during actual program execution during the year of assisting people in decision making.
Absolutely correct. That's right. So if you look at the programmatic risk section of it, for example, that's number 3.
Right.
So that box there in the gray, those check marks, as well as the bullets that talk about our medium risk appetite for programmatic risk, those are all themes that we want all of our mission directors, all of our bureau leadership to be looking at and keeping in mind as they're making funding decisions. This is, in many ways, a roadmap for how we want to do our business on the program side.
Yeah, and it's in line. I mean, there's the new laws and regs that are coming out. You guys are in line with that. The whole foundations of evidence-based decision making. That's your first check right there. We're going to be making decisions based on evidence, best evidence available. Right. So I mean, this is really ties a lot of things together in management, right? It's not just this standalone program at all. It's very much integrating things. So yeah, that's a great example. Well, we're not going to keep it too long. I think we have one more question, and really just curious about what do you see as the future, or the next steps, the wish list? What are you all looking to do next with the program?
Well, from my perspective, I'll take my direction from Bill, but we pretty much align our thinking of where we want to bring the program and mature the program. So we want to make a tighter nexus to the program cycle and the budget cycle, because right now those cycle happens at different points of the year, and so we want to weave it in where it's not overburdensome and bureaucratic.
Right.
Okay, so that they have information in a timely manner. Now, the good thing of it is that all the program managers, they know what their risks are. The risk is documented in the risk appetite as well.
Right.
And it is documented in the agency risk profile, okay, with the significant risk, right? And the mitigation strategy also documented there. Okay, and so we envision, at least I envision from a budget perspective, that when you look at a organization budget and they have risks on that profile, I would expect that risk to be called out. Now, why did I say actually called out? Because what's on that profile is been designated as the most significant risk that can impact the mission and objectives of the agency. So
If
you
you're,
would
if you're not
expect
making
that
resource decisions are the highest priorities.
Exactly.
Right.
So that's as we are maturing the process and documenting it. I'm looking forward to where we will have that clearly integrated with that process.
You guys have your 3-year budget cycle where you have out year planning for year +2, and then you're in the C stage and on B stage for year +1. You have the execution of tying your risk meetings to critical points in the calendar that feed into your 3-year cycle. Is that part of where you're going?
That's where we want to go.
Great.
How about on performance management meetings with risk management meetings? Have those been integrated together? I mean, right now, a lot of places, they still have their performance management meetings aside, and then risk management's over here, and yet you're saying, if you're examining what your goals are and how you're performing, and over here you're examining what your obstacles to performance are. Well, it's like the Reese's peanut butter cup commercial. I mean, those two ought to go together, right? It's are you guys moving that direction, or?
I'll let Bill address the program side.
Yeah, we want to move in that direction. Exactly. That's one of the next stages. I'd say that and 2 other things are really the next phases we need to get done to institutionalize this and make sure that people live it. It's not just, as you say, something that sits on the shelf or sits on a website.
Right.
The other one is going down to the level of all of our 80 missions around the world. We've started that process. They have to do their own risk profiles now. Those things are coming now, due here in the summertime. But we got to make sure that culturally that's not a box checking exercise for them either, that at those posts they are living this and making their own budgetary management strategic decisions at that level using these kind of documents, using the appetite statement as their North Star, and then using their own risk profiles customized for those environments for what they want. And then the third thing is that we got to train people. There's a continuous learning aspect to this where we have to make sure everybody that we bring on board continually gets refreshed and introduced to this.
And that words mean things.
Well, with that, we thank you very much for being on the show today. We're going to put the links to the document on our website.
Great.
And encourage everybody to download it and build their own statement out there. Everybody needs a risk appetite statement. Would you agree?
Great.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much.
Great conversation. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
That's our show. Thanks for tuning in. Check us out at AFERM.org. All our podcasts are there. If you have any ideas, let us know. We'll be happy to invite some guests over and chat about some other issues. So until next time, this is Paul Marshall signing off for Risk Chats with AFERM.